Welcome back to the Keep Going podcast with Vin Kennedy. I'm your host, Vin Kennedy. Today we have a guest. This is Astra. Astra, would you like to do a brief intro on yourself?
Do you want a short version or a long version?
Either way, whatever you think.
All right, so my background goes from if I talk a little bit about my background, I am from South America originally. So I was born in Venezuela, was born and raised in there for probably my first 22 years of my life. So I did my bachelor's degree in nutrition dietetics over there. Then I did a little bit of a time where I practiced just mostly my private practice as a dietitian. And then I traveled to Australia and I made like a year and a half of kind of like exploration of what would I do with my life. And I decided to do my master's degree. And we moved here pretty much 3 years later after I graduated in my bachelor's degree. And I spent about 2.5 years doing my master's degree in nutrition dietetic and practice. And straight after that, I pretty much got into a kind of like the health private sector where I was in a hospital in a mental health and rehab setting where I pretty much do clinical dietetics in that setting. And I also do a bit of acute nutrition in acute hospital. So that is my clinical background, but I also have been coaching in my online nutrition world for over probably 9, 10 years, probably a little bit more, but I used to be more one-on-one in person. And then I started shifting to online when I moved to Australia. So that's what I've been pretty much doing for the past 15 years, roughly.
Yeah.
In combination with that, I currently work with Team BioLane, with Lane Norton, and I'm one of the master coaches in the team. I've been working with them for about almost 2 years and a half. Apart from that, whatever any other questions you have, my life is I'm open to talk about anything.
Awesome. Well, I guess first is what was your draw to nutrition and like why the fitness industry?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind when I decided to be inclined for nutrition, I don't know if this is a common pattern from anyone who decides to study nutrition, but one of them was that I wanted to look better and I wanted to learn how to design meal plans. And I thought being a dietitian or a nutritionist was being able to design meal plans. That's what I thought it was, just doing that. But it actually, when I did my bachelor's degree, like this is much more profound and this goes way beyond just doing a meal plan. So that pretty much was the biggest driver. And I was already in the fitness industry when I did start my my bachelor's degree. I started in the fitness industry when I was about 12 years old. So teaching classes like group fitness classes, personal training. I was doing all of that almost around 12, between 12 and 15. I did certifications. I got a lot of different education background around fitness classes and group classes. So that was my first driver. I was surrounded by a lot of coaches or personal trainers at the time that they didn't know what they were doing. And I saw how they would give a diet the same diet to everyone. And it was so boring, so repetitive and simple. And it was so restrictive that anyone who followed that would lose weight, like obviously. they weren't really calculating macros or protein or calories or this is your requirements. None of that was taken into consideration. It was more like, okay, for breakfast, you're going to have cereal with milk or eggs with toast. For lunch, you will have chicken and broccoli, a bit of rice. Dinner, pretty much the same, fish or chicken and rice and a little bit of broccoli or lettuce. Obviously, that was a low calorie diet for whoever followed that. And it was like, this doesn't make any sense that everyone would feel they can follow this for that long. Like it's unsustainable in the first place. So that's why I was intrigued. Like this, there needs to be something beyond that. And then I kind of started reading around everything about macros, protein, metabolism. Like, my goodness, this is so interesting. And I was in between 3 degrees. I wanted to do physiotherapy or medicine or nutrition. So I was about to do my exam to get into medicine, but then I kind of had a reality moment when I realized that I couldn't see blood without fainting. So I was like, I don't think that is
Not gonna work out.
the right one for me. So
Yeah.
let's talk about physiotherapy. And I really like that one, but when I started looking at the pensum or like the all the different subjects you need to study, there was a lot of physics and like math and calculations and like, no, this is not me
Yeah.
either. So like, look, I think nutrition is calling me and that's where I'm going for. And that's why I ended it there.
Yeah, and something I want to unpack, which is like a really unique approach that you take that I've found through quite the journey, is that it's so psychological and it's not just as simple as, like you said, I mean, you could put anybody on a crash course diet and they're going to lose weight. If you put anybody in a severe calorie deficit, you're going to lose weight, but it's all about like adherence and what you could sustain. Because, you know, if you could do it for life, now you have something that's sustainable and you can actually consistently make progress rather than like always chasing, you know, the six pack for the summer and then you put on weight during the summer and then you kind of chase it again. But what is it for you? Like, what was the switch that you realized like this is psychological and that like there's emotions with this. It's not just following a plan because obviously adherence is a big issue as well.
When I started realizing and learning more about motivational interviewing, habits, more into true depth behavioral changes, when I did my master's degree. When I came to Australia and I started doing my master's, there was a few different subjects that when we did the practice, the the consultations per se were driven in a different way that I was used to take or do the consultations. It was less prescriptive and more that collaboration, that negotiation, that involvement of the client, or in this case, the patient, into decision making, into trying to understand their motivational state, where they were at that point in time, and analyzing whether they actually were ready to change or they needed to have more time on their own to actually get to a point where they wanted to do the change. Because there's no point for us to do a lot of interventions when the person is not ready to change. They're not aware of the consequences, or they don't actually feel the pain yet of the consequences or whatever is potentially going to be affecting their health, their life, their emotional, the psychological, the physiological, whatever it is. So until they realize that there is a problem and they learn more about it, it is much harder for them to transition to a state where they are ready for that change to happen. So once I understood that the best approach was more that collaboration versus just prescribing and telling you what to do without having your consent or having that communication where I could know what you were your needs or what were you doing in the first place, so I could potentially match or make some easier swaps that could align better to what you could adhere in the future. Then I kind of like started thinking this needs to be changed. And as a dietitian or even nutrition coach, understanding more the psychology, the behaviors, how people feel, how people think, and understanding they're humans, and kind of like trying to sit in their shoes to learn that compassionate approach. That's where I felt like this is the best approach when it comes to working with humans, and mostly when it comes to behavior change and trying to implement something that someone can adhere to. And later on in the past, potentially 3 years, I've gotten deeper into um, eating disorders and that psychology of eating, that emotional eating, all of these different aspects that go beyond just the behaviors or habits per se, but how different approaches or like different backgrounds, our upbringing, our past potential traumas can take a deep root in our central core in our brain, and not even feel like they are having a space where they're dominating certain behaviors that we don't even know, we're not even aware of, until something happened or someone can draw that from us and give us that awareness. Hey, something could be coming from your past, that it is bringing this response from you, and that's why you potentially are emotionally eating or binge eating or having this unhealthy relationship with food in the first place. So trying to understand the root causes of that rather than just telling you, hey, just go and distract yourself, or just take a glass of water and eat a banana and just wait for 5 minutes and see what happens. Yes, that something sometimes helps as a strategies when you are more generally craving for something, but there is no deep roots of emotional behaviors or like trauma or something deeper. But when it comes to understanding kind of the past and the background of someone who is behaving in a certain way and has these issues with food, with their body image, with their body on it as a whole, is when it makes sense to go deeper and try to understand that it's not necessarily, it's not even sometimes about food. Sometimes I speak with clients and we don't even talk or mention anything about food at all. Is behaviors, is things from the past, is we can potentially do or have 3-4 consultations, and in the fourth consultation then we start talking about, okay, what's in your diet, how many grams of protein or how many calories you're eating in a day. So is that to a point to reflect that yes, the psychological and the emotional background of someone can have a much deeper impact on adherence, on being able to see why any diet is not working for me. Even if it was a perfect design diet for me, it's not working because I have a broken mindset. I have a broken pattern of behaviors that are coming from different roots that have nothing to do with food, but I'm just reflecting that on my behaviors, and therefore I use food as a coping mechanism, as escape, as a way to lead and deal with something uncomfortable, something that is, it's like there's no other way I know how to deal with it. So the easiest and the fastest way is just to grab for something that just takes me away for a period of time. But then because the actual problem hasn't been addressed, then it's kind of like it actually didn't work. So it's just
Right.
more like for that hype of dopamine that we get at the time because of the flavors, the excitement of eating something that really is very delicious, because you never, like, you wouldn't use as a coping mechanism carrots or spinach, like, never happens. It would be something more highly palatable, very crunchy, delicious, tasty, that will bring that sort of dopamine and sort of emotions and taste and pleasure. That's what unconsciously, potentially, your body is searching for to combat that negative emotion that is bothering you, is making you feel depressed, down, upset. Hopefully it makes sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes I
No,
ramble a
absolutely.
bit. Yeah,
No, it's I think it's the instant gratification, right? Where it's like you can't handle what's going on, so this will make you feel good in the short term rather than if you adhere to maybe a healthier style of eating, you'll make changes, but it's going to take a while. And I think something
yeah,
so important you touched on is collaboration because I know a ton of people that work with coaches. Listen, if you're stepping on a stage and you're following a plan to a T, I completely understand. If you're going to get on a bodybuilding stage, if you have a specific body image you're searching for maybe a photo shoot or something like that, it makes complete sense. But if you're following what someone else is telling you to eat specifically to a T and it's not the food you enjoy, you're never going to sustain that plan. And it
yeah,
took me
yeah.
forever to realize that. But and even in my own household, like I would try and help my family, and it's like, oh, just eat this and you'll be fine. And it's like, well, if just say my mom doesn't like eggs, like how I'm not going to force her to eat eggs. It might last a couple of days, or even it might last a while. She might see change, but then at some point, it's going to come back to baseline and normal of, and again, that goes into our conditioning and our emotions, where you can't see past that stuff. Like you said, you almost need an outside perspective, like a 40 foot view up of seeing everything to get out of your own mind and have someone like yourself come in and help and intervene and help you make those changes because and I've seen it too, like it really is, it's psychological. It's not a lot of the time, like you said, we're reaching for the food because something happened. Something that pops right in my mind is the day I lost my grandmother. Um, it was me and my little sister home, and I was in a marathon prep, so I like to eat healthier just so I'm lighter and I don't hurt anything when I'm running. And my sister, like the minute we found out we were both hungry, we were about to eat and then go see the rest of my family. And my sister reached for the cookies, and I was just like, I knew in my mind, I was like, that would make it better right now, but it's not going to serve me later. And it's really, what is that going to do? Because right now we're coping with the loss of our grandmother. The band-aid of cookies right now isn't going to help in the long run. But it's so interesting that you say it like that.
It is absolutely right when we think about using food as a escape, as I said before. But I have a very strong motto that I use for kind of understanding the reason behind why we eat. And I usually say, if hunger is not the problem, food is not going to be the solution. So when you kind of try to reflect on that statement, it truly makes you more aware of, like, am I truly hungry in the first place? Is it hunger what I feel, or is it something else? Am I hungry, or am I angry? Am I feeling lonely? Am I sleepy? Am I tired? What is the true emotion that is driving that behavior, rather than just acting impulsively to a specific feeling that we have in a specific moment in time? So when you are able to bring your senses, and rather than just listening and act to an impulse, that urge, which is the kind of the more specific term for what we feel that describes that sort of need, that impulsive need to reach straight away for something to numb that uncomfortable feeling, is when we truly understand, okay, let me pause for a second, sit with my emotions, take a deep breath. What am I feeling right now? What was just happening today? Have I just finished, or have I just had a discussion with my husband, for example, and I am truly upset? Am I needing to eat to feel better? Is it going to make me feel better? So when I started asking myself questions that challenge my emotions and my urges, it gives you more power to make better choices, bringing your awareness and bringing potentially your whys in your present moment. Okay, I really want to lose body fat, for example. If it's one of the biggest goals for a lot of my clients, they want to improve their body composition, but they also struggle with emotional eating. So what if we just stop for a second, and rather than just acting on the urge, you let it sit and you reflect on what is driving that emotion in the first place. If you allow for that compassionate reflection, you may be able to stop yourself and say, this is probably not going to fix it. I might better just, I don't know, maybe I have just to apologize, or I maybe just need to be the one who makes the waters more calm, or hugs your partner and brings that root emotion to a more balanced place. And once that happens, you start noticing that that urge pretty much goes away, because the uncomfortable feeling that you were having is now addressed with the proper strategies and the actual cause of that sensation of discomfort. Now, I think another really good thing that I like to talk about is identifying the different types of hunger, and how not all forms of hunger are the same or created equal. And when we understand that there are different ways that we can sort of interpret the reason of why we eat or we're driven to food, that allows us to see which kind of pocket or bucket we are sitting at that point in time. So I usually talk about 7 types of hunger. One of those is obviously that physical and biological hunger. That's it's coming from your being truly hungry. Your stomach is growling, you are needing fuel. But it's also, we can talk about taste hunger, when you eat because something is truly delicious and you just eat it because you like it. It brings that pleasure. But there is nothing else associated with that intention. It's more like, I eat it because I like it. That's it. There's also that emotional hunger, which is mostly that emotional eating. We can divide it in, I like to divide it in the positive and the negative. So the positive is when you use that emotional eating related to memories. So for example, you're bringing your grandmother used to prepare biscuits or cookies for you. And when you see them or you smell them, it's like you just go and fly back and remember that particular time. And this is just, maybe it's just something special that makes you feel really good. So that's why sometimes you eat it. And that is kind of like emotional hunger related to memories. But there's also the coping emotional hunger, which is the one that I just spoke about a while ago. Then we also have practical hunger, which is something that I tend to do a lot for like the type of job I have in the hospital, where I start my shift at 10 a.m. and then I finish at 4 p.m. And I could, if I wanted to, take a meal with me and have a break. But I usually find that I rather have a bigger meal comfortable in at home rather than just scrapping and eating in my car or just heating something. I just prefer to have the comfort of being at home and eat as much as I want, having everything I need around. So I just decided I'll just eat a big meal, even if I'm not that hungry, but I'm going to prepare my body for a period of time that I'm not going to be able to eat. I have a little snack perhaps or something simple, but it's obviously not going to be a huge meal. And that could be 8 hours, potentially 9 hours without food, just hydration and maybe a bit of a snack or something. And then I go home and I get here probably 6, 7 p.m. So from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., I haven't eaten anything, but I'm not truly desperate because I prepare myself from the very first moment during the day. So that is practical hunger. You're eating even though you're not hungry, but you're preparing for something that you're unlikely to have access to food or eat adequately. Then you have habitual hunger, which is basically when you have a eating pattern that you get used to repeat, and you are so used to that eating pattern that even if you're not hungry, you sort of eat anyways. And this is very common in when you sort of develop a eating pattern. A lot of my clients that I don't know, they have been taking antidepressants or certain medications where somehow they develop this extra hunger, that when they are taken off the medication because they got used to have that extra snack, that already kind of becomes a habit for them. So then it's not a hunger problem, it's more like it is just is there. Then we have the deprivation type of hunger, which comes more as that binge reaction from restriction, from, oh, this food is bad, I can't eat this food, this is not allowed in my diet, or chronic dieters that are just exposed to off limit foods, always a restriction, always a very low calorie diet. So when they see food that are available at some point, is like this desperate behavior of a scarcity mindset. It's like I probably won't be able to have this anymore. So it's like that desperate eating. And the last one is around social hunger, which is not necessarily hunger per se, but it's more like that eating when you're around people. And I like to teach my clients to use these very specifically to create memories, make it not as a principal or main event that is driving you to eat, but it's more like I'm using food to create a special moment. So that's when we make cakes for birthdays, or when we celebrate something because someone is graduating, and then all the family gets together. It's a meal, and that's what is called social hungers. We're just eating something kind of in unity to create a special moment. So when you are aware of these different forms of hunger, of the reasons behind why we eat, then you can sort of have much more awareness and better understanding of, okay, I am probably acting because of a habit, or maybe I'm eating because I need to eat because I have a very long shift in front of me and I have to be prepared, or I'm actually hungry and I need to fuel my body. So I guess the more you understand and are aware of your own personal drivers to eat, allows you to better make choices that are going to align with better decisions, better control over your own nutrition choices.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think something so important is we don't question why we're going to like reach for food. It's so true. Like you don't ask yourself like, why am I going to eat right now? Like I run a lot. So on Saturdays and Sundays, I do like long runs. So I'll have like a 15-mile run and the next day I'll run like 22 miles. So I know on those days after I finish 22 miles, I'm actually hungry. Like I need to eat. I need to fuel my body. But it's true, like a normal Monday, middle of the day, sometimes I'm like, you're just bored. And it's like, you're working, you're doing whatever, and it's like it's just easy. It's something to do almost. And then, like you said, it also becomes habit, right? Like we just fall into these loops of like, well, this is when I eat, this is when I do that. It's so it's so easy to get lost in that. And I'm curious your take on like, I know if you're with Lane Norton, you're thinking of it's definitely calories in, calories out. But when it comes to processed foods, do you think it does hinder people's decision making as far as like it is more palatable, so it can create the likelihood of overeating? Or does it really just come down to calories in, calories out? And like I'm just wondering if those type of foods can mess with like your satiety signals. How do you feel about that?
Well, all foods, I like to make a big difference between ultra processed foods and processed foods, because processed foods, everything is processed. If you think about it, even the fruit you have in your fridge has been manually processed by humans somehow. So it is processed. Like the milk you drink is processed, because it's not like you drinking from the teat of the cow. So it has experienced and gone through certain processes. Now, ultra processed foods that have been not just processed, but have been made in a way that they have like a really specific combination of tastes, salt, sugar, and salt, which is called the bliss point, which makes them hyper palatable, super delicious, makes people to want more. Can, depending on the context, can mess up with your appetite and hunger regulation, especially if the entirety of your diet is sort of poor or is a little bit messed up. If you have, like, I like to think about 80-20 rule. Like if 20% of your diet has some of these ultra processed foods, highly palatable, high calories, rich in all these delicious hyper palatable foods, I think it is totally fine as as part of a healthy balanced diet. Now, if 80% of your diet is these highly processed foods, most likely you're not getting enough nutrients, vitamins, minerals. You probably are not getting enough protein, high quality protein. And it also depends on how long you eat these foods for. But if it's just like, let's say, 3 days a week, it's very unlikely that you'll have too many issues, because somehow you can still, if you're in a calorie deficit and you eat, let's say, McDonald's or this type of poor poor nutrient dense diet, you can still lose body fat. Now, how is the hunger regulation and appetite and satiety? That is questionable. And it can get worse the longer you go with these diets. But if you say it is a short period of time, likely you're not going to experience too many issues. Usually, when fiber is low and protein is low, hunger and satiety will be a bit of an issue if you're in a calorie deficit. So let's say you have a very constrained amount of calories. 2 hamburgers already and fries will already meet 2,000 calories. So, like, is this all what I'm going to eat? I am used to eat much more. So I'm probably going to experience, I'm not going to be satisfied, and I'm probably hungry later on. But if you're on a surplus and you're eating these kind of foods where there is a high level of saturated fats or fats overall, and there is a lot of carbohydrates, you can be potentially quite satiated. But again, for how long and how this is going to contribute to your health and these nutritious trickling of vitamins, minerals, important nutrients that your body needs to in order to function, that's why they're called essential. These can make or have deleterious consequences if you go for a long period of time, over 15 days, a month, potentially. Beyond that, you could start seeing deficiencies and start seeing the negative effects of a poor diet. But other than that, let's say you're in a calorie deficit and you eat those foods every now and then as a 80-20 rule, let's say, you can still manage to include them and have a good ratio of satiety, nutrient dense foods, and also these, I like calling them soul foods, because they are potentially something that you do enjoy and makes you really happy when you eat ice cream with your husband, or something that you truly enjoy. So it's okay to have it, but it's frequency, portion size, and what is the connotation and the context, the intention of eating that. So I like to talk about, there's not necessarily bad foods per se, even if they're ultra processed or demonized as we all the time hear. There's just bad portion sizes.
Yeah, so basically, if someone does come to you and they are eating poor foods 80% of the time, and you know, nutrient dense foods and healthy foods 20% of the time, what is like one of the first changes? I know you go into like a psychological conversation, it's not as easy as just like, you know, eat this, don't eat that kind of thing. But what is like one of the first changes you generally tell people when you do see that they're eating poor foods most of the time?
Most times I will try to sit down and understand maybe why is that pattern in the first place established? How long has that been going on for? And maybe just start trying to negotiate and incorporate nutritious foods within their current diet. So maybe just finding different ways to cook at home if they eat a lot out. Or how can we make this specific food more at home? So then you can manipulate better the ingredients without changing too much what it is. Or how can we make it in a much healthier way, more macro-friendly way that just reduces some of the health risk. And I kind of explain some of diet disease relationship, how these type of foods or this type of diet overall could lead to certain consequences when it comes to health. So this is what we do in hospital when we have these patients or they have no much awareness of their diet. And we kind of try to say, well, this is a diet really high in saturated fats. Is it something that you think you could change? So it's more like that motivational interviewing. Are there things that you like that you could swap for something else? Or where do you actually see that your diet could improve without you making any changes or making any recommendations or suggestions? And sometimes they will have that initiative to respond, well, I think I could do maybe change this, or I could eat a little bit more protein, or hey, I know I don't eat much vegetables, but I just don't really like them very much. How can I incorporate more fiber without eating too much salads because I hate them? So it's like trying to give them strategies, give them tools that they can use. And again, it's seeing where they are in the state of change. If they have no intention to change, it is very likely that you can just give them education, give them some awareness, but they may not make any changes at that point in time. But you kind of like put the seed, and you did the best to give them that awareness. Maybe over time they start kind of like putting the puzzle together and understanding, oh, this is what this meant. And then they come to you or come to someone else, but they have a different attitude and they're ready to change. But this is all that teamwork, that combination of knowing where they are, understanding the baseline, their background, see whether they are ready to change, and try to negotiate and bring them into that decision making. What do you think you can change? Where do you think there is some area for improvement? And try to address concerns or the questions they ask you if they have probably contradictory knowledge about specific things. Well, I don't eat protein because I've been told for my entire life that eating too much protein, it causes kidney damage. So then you break those myths. Oh, well, look, this is actually not true, and you are more than safe if you want to eat a higher protein diet, provided that you don't have any issues with your kidneys. So how is your eGFR? How is your functioning, your kidney function? Your eGFR is over 90, over 65. Perfect, it's fine. So why would you worried about it? No need to worry about it. So what you can do is we can start working on ways to improve or increase our protein intake and break that myth by utilizing that knowledge you have and give them that awareness.
Yeah. No, it's so important. I think all great coaches, and obviously not just nutrition, but in everything, it's meeting the person where they're at and then helping them and collaborating, like you said, to get to where they want to go. And that's something that makes sustainable change and creates adherence. Um, and something that I've personally dealt with a ton, and I think it's from being very active. And I think at a young age, I've recently uncovered this. I used to come home from school and just eat like a box of cookies, but I was so active and my mom never really said anything about it. And it was kind of like normal. And then obviously as I grew up, I stopped doing that. But now a couple of years ago and even a few years ago, I found myself more active and I was, running like 10 miles and lifting and I would just be so hungry and I would tend to binge eat. And I was just curious, like, how you generally work around binge eating. And I know personally for me, it is that idea of like when you do label things as bad and you can't have that, it causes a poor relationship, which is what personally led to, me overeating those foods on specific days. But yeah, I'm curious, curious your take on binge eating.
Well, binge eating will have different factors or different causes. So one of them is obviously that restriction, that chronic restriction, because you feel like they're bad foods. So when you run out of that willpower, then you pretty much just eat them as much as you can. And you have this scarcity mindset of like, I won't be able to have it anymore. So I'll better just eat as much as I can today, because it's like you out of cheating yourself of eating something that you know you couldn't eat before, but you are eating it now. This is one of those. But binge eating can also come from a root of being disgusted with yourself, poor body image, a very poor relationship with yourself. It could come from trauma and you using that compensatory mechanism to numb yourself from a traumatic past. It could be that there is a suboptimal chronic dieting that you've been under eating for so long that your body's just craving for more energy availability. Most times I see patients or clients that they are struggling with their performance, their sleep, the menstrual cycle. There's like a wide range of things. And you can see them as well, like after a bodybuilding competition. You see them so lean, and they truly want to maintain that lean physique at expense of lots of different risks, including that eating behaviors of just binging when they can and purging the later on, or trying to get rid of as much as they can, or utilizing pills that allow you to trick and cut corners. So, well, if I take this particular pill, I don't absorb as much fats. If I take this particular pills, I don't absorb as much carbohydrates. So then you're sort of trying to trick your body by doing things that are going to reduce absorption of certain nutrients, allowing you to eat more. But this is also a double-edged sword, because you are not eating enough. And potentially on the other end, you are trying to train consistently, trying to maintain a physique, an amount of lean body mass that requires that fuel, but there's no enough fuel. So the only compensatory mechanism for your body to get that fuel is to just shoot this amount of insatiable hunger that it is just uncontrollable.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. And you said it too. I feel like especially with like bodybuilders, like you step off the stage and you're that lean and you're like, oh, I want to stay this lean forever. And I was in a position in 2020 during COVID. We had nothing to do, but personally, I just worked out. So I was insanely lean and I was barely eating out. So I was able to control the variables. But I knew once, everything opened back up, I was like, this isn't sustainable and I can't have this be my life. I was definitely single digit body fat, but it was just something that I did for the time being because I knew I could sustain it, but it's not reality. And I feel like a lot of people get stuck in that where it's like, I need to be, 7, 8% body fat.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
unsustainable and not realistic to maintain that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then so how did you find Lane Norton and what is kind of like your take on joining his team? It seems I love his information, his videos as well. And that's actually how I found you.
Um, it's an interesting story because he first contacted me when a few years ago to make him some content. So I started translating some of the, not translating, but taking some research and putting them into posts. So some of his old posts that were kind of breaking down the research was me pretty much doing those posts. So I started working with him in the social media aspect. And then I worked for him and Holly, his ex-wife, and I basically was doing the same for both. Was doing taking some research or coming up with certain pieces of content, and I was putting that into Canvas and creating the content for them. That lasted for about 1 year or 2 years. Then I commenced a more like a part-time work with Clean Health Fitness Institute as a part-time dietitian. And I also was in my part-time job, so there was no much more time for me to create more content. But over time, I think 6 months later, they just called me to ask me if I wanted to join their team. And I was like, hell yeah, I would love that. And because we always had a really good relationship since I started working with them, and since then we've been pretty good. Sometimes we have our sort of serious conversations like, hey, you gotta do this, you gotta do that better. Like some of the things that I've grown as a coach, and sometimes we kind of see that there is a little bit of that extra accountability that we need. So that has been really great to be part of a team. I think I needed that for my kind of personality and the way I like to work, just knowing that you can grow with someone and with a team of really good coaches that will feed with each other and complement each other, because we all have different sort of like skills. So when we pretty much come together, it's really, really special. It's really good.
That's awesome. And do you deal with like clients on like going into contests like bodybuilding shows?
I have had a few over time because I've kind of taken my expertise more to the behavioral component. Um, I think I like to leave that more to one of our coaches that work with female physiques, and I do more like the post. So it's more like reverse diets, building faces, or work with that post-show reverse, getting them into a more healthier relationship with food rather than taking the dieting phase. But if I do have a couple of clients that have decided, hey, I just think I would like to compete, like, hell, just pick a date, let's do it.
Yeah,
And we go
absolutely.
for it. And I actually
And
have a couple of clients, it was like she was turning 50 and she got a silver and a I think it was bronze, but it was her first time competing. Like, girl, you 50 years old. Like, it was impressive. I'm
that's
very proud
awesome.
of her.
Yeah. And lastly, what keeps you going? Like, what's your why in all of this and like in coaching and in life?
For me, is to being able to see that, because I know I come from a background where I personally struggle with my relationship with food. I struggle with bulimia. I know how it feels being in a dark place, and I know how nowadays even more. I think there's a lot of people struggling with that, and I I was never able to open up or talk about it or get help or just express my concerns until I was confronted by reality and I had to learn on my own to do better. And just later in the years, I've realized that it would have been so much easier to have a coach and to have someone next to me providing some accountability, sometimes just giving me tough love, but also being able to get that compassionate feeling that I needed, that compassionate talk. Sometimes when I just needed that feedback. So when I see my younger self and I see my past, that's what I would have liked to have. And when I see myself now coaching the way I coach and seeing how many people feel free and feel transformed, I feel really good about it because I am making an important impact that is changing lives for the better. I am receiving feedback from clients that they no longer have to think about food 24/7. They can enjoy time with their family. They can have a trip or go on holiday and being able to enjoy that because they no longer fixating on food or everything around tracking or making their priority the scale, the number on the scale. So having that mindset transformation for me is huge, and being able to get all my clients in a place where even if they are in a bad day, they are not this all or nothing. They can still decide to do something instead of nothing and still progress, move forward, feel better about the decision they made this time compared to their old selves. So that's what keeps me going, that it's just being able to see that change. And that is not like this is what you learn, tomorrow you lose it, because it's just giving them skills for life.
Right. Absolutely. I love that. And I say it all the time, like it's becoming the leader you needed, right? Yeah, it's so
Definitely.
important. But honestly, I really appreciate your time. I know it's now 9:45 for you PM. It's 7:45 here, but I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Of course.